Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Germination webinar. I am Germination editor Mark Zinkowitz, and I'm happy to be your host. Today's theme is seed regulatory modernization. Now, during today's presentations, you'll no doubt have some questions for our speakers. Please type these into the chat box at any time during the webinar. We'll be doing a Q&A session at the end. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available at germination.ca following the event. Today's topic is seed regulatory modernization. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency plans to modernize the seeds regulations as they apply to seeds imported, conditioned, stored, tested, labeled, exported, and sold in Canada. Now, why is this being done? To reduce overlap and redundancy, increase responsiveness to industry changes, address gaps, weaknesses, and inconsistencies, and provide clarity and flexibility to affected regulated parties. The planned timeline for modernization proposals to be put forward by the federal government is the fall of 2021. Now, the Government of Canada has identified the Canadian seed industry as a key stakeholder in this. Our industry must be prepared to provide input for the consultation. A seed regulatory modernization working group has been established to help facilitate that. This webinar and webinars to come after it will allow the working group to inform you, answer questions, and gather feedback so that the working group can provide a set of recommendations to the Seed Sector Value Chain Roundtable for input to the CFIA as it develops its proposed options for seed regulation amendments by fall of 2021. The working group will examine the respective roles and responsibilities of government and the private sector in a next-generation seed system resulting from seed regulatory modernization. It will also identify relevant areas of concern and topics of interest to develop and implement a work plan to review, analyze, and recommend options for improvement. Changes to the seeds regulations will affect your operations, and our goal at Germination with these webinars is to ensure you know what's going on, why it's going on, and have a chance to ask questions and offer your input to ensure that those effects are positive. Also, the changes will determine the functions and services performed by the new National Seed Organization, or NSO, which you've heard about in previous webinars that I've hosted. In order to meet the fall 2021 deadline, Germination feels it's important to develop a forum where you can connect with the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group. So today we'll hear a broad overview of the current seed regulations in Canada, an introduction to what regulatory modernization is, and the terms of reference that will be used by the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group as it goes ahead. This will be a fairly short webinar today. The idea is to give you a brief introduction to regulatory modernization and the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group. We will be taking questions at the end, so like I said, please at any moment during the webinar type your question into the chat box and we will address it when our two speakers are finished. Our first speaker today is Mike Scheffel, Managing Director, Policy and Standards for the Canadian Seed Growers Association. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mike. We are looking forward to your insights.
Okay, thanks. And it's very good to be here today. I'm going to give a description of the Canadian seed system, a very high level and necessarily concise description, just to get everybody on the same page so that we understand what we're talking about here. So I like to think of Canada's seed system as including the laws, the regulations, the policies, rules, and procedures, collectively known as requirements, that apply to seed in the first place, and then the organizations that regulate seed, and those in the seed sector who are regulated. So seed system regulators include the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Canadian Seed Growers Association, and the Canadian Seed Institute. Regulated parties are basically any person who produces, imports, exports, or sells seed, or who registers a variety or produces certified seed. They're the regulated parties. The CFIA administers and enforces the Seeds Act and the Seeds regulations. This legal framework is based on three major principles. And these are fairly unique to Canada, although other countries, other jurisdictions do have some of these elements as well. First of all, seed must meet specified standards and be packed and labeled as specified. Collectively, I refer to these as seed quality standards. Second, for most agricultural field crops, only seed of a variety that is registered can be imported or sold in Canada. This is variety registration. Third, most seed must be labeled with a grade name for sale in Canada. So this is seed grading. So these three basic principles, seed quality standards, variety registration, and seed grading, are the three principal factors that influence the regulatory environment for seed in Canada. The CSGA, another seed system regulator, has been delegated authority by the Government of Canada to establish standards for varietal purity and to certify seed crops. And this authority comes through the seeds regulations. It operates in cooperation with the CFIA. The CSGA certifies seed crops, while the CFIA is the authority for seed certification in Canada. And varietal certification provides seed genetic identity assurance. The Canadian Seed Institute is the third organization which is recognized by the CFIA as a conformity verification body and provides quality management oversight of registered seed establishments and accredited seed laboratories in support of the Canadian seed system. Upcoming CFIA consultations on seed regulatory modernization may include the role of government and industry in terms of private partnerships for functions such as variety registration, seed standards, and seed certification. In that regard, I think it's important for people to understand some key concepts that may be discussed in the seed regulatory modernization exercise. The first that I would like to mention is incorporation by reference. Incorporation by reference is a regulatory tool that allows regulations to reference documents that reside outside of regulations, yet have the force of regulations when referenced. These can be government or non-government documents. Current examples are the Canadian Methods and Procedures for Testing Seed, which is a government document, and CSGA's Circular 6, which is a non-government document. Parts of the current seeds regulations, for example, the grade tables, could be moved into a document that is referenced by regulations rather than residing in the regulations themselves. This would make changes to the grade tables easier in the future. A second concept that was discussed widely during the seed synergy discussions of the past several years is the single window. Single window is a one-stop shop, the place you go to get all the information and the regulatory services that you need as a regulated party. As an example, a variety profile platform was proposed pursuant to the Seed Synergy white paper that would contain detailed information about registered varieties, including descriptions of varieties, plant breeders' rights status, foreign market acceptance, and other information about varieties. Thirdly, digital end-to-end seed certification. Moving to a fully digital seed certification system with electronic crop certificates and pedigreed seed declarations. It's been referred to as Seed Cert 2.0 and has the potential to establish certified seed as blockchain ready able to plug into crop value chains as a value-added product with enhanced transparency and traceability. Seed regulatory modernization was identified 3 years ago by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency as an area for their work at some point in the future. A seed regulatory modernization working group has been established by the Government of Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to help the Government of Canada manage the seed regulatory review. The Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group was to have met April 1st to determine what sort of process they wish to follow and what the major topics for consideration might be. However, that meeting was postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis and other priorities for the government. Therefore, we're not quite sure when the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group will meet and will start to deliberate on the future of the seed regulatory modernization process, but we expect that it will happen later this summer or early fall. In the meantime, I believe it's important for some of us as regulators at CSGA and CSI, and for you as regulated parties to begin to consider some of the changes that we would like to see.
And having a forum like this is definitely important. Thank you so much, Mike. Our next speaker is Claudio Fuellner. He is Manager, Regulatory Affairs and Trade for the Canadian Seed Trade Association. Claudio acts as the technical and scientific lead for the CSTA. He also keeps committees engaged all year round to ensure progress on work plan items. Welcome, Claudio. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Pleasure to be on that Germination webinar on this very important topic.
No, thank you, Claudio. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group and the terms of reference that it is going to be operating by.
We've heard from Mike Scheffel on a little bit of the background of the seed regulations and seed regulatory modernization and the goals of CFIA and a little bit about the timeline. I was part of the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group drafting team for the terms of references. So the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group concept was born last year on March 18th at the last face-to-face value chain roundtable meeting of the seed sector. Glenn Chansey from the CSGA and Wendy Young, the National Manager of the Seed Section of the Canadian Food Inspection Agencies, are the two co-chairs of this working group, and there's been a terms of reference out for this working group since the summer of 2019. I won't go too much into the background of the working group. We've heard that from Mike, but once again, the mandate of this working group is to examine the seed system in Canada and propose potential avenues for modernization and improvement. So the objective of the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group is to provide a set of recommendations to an AFC roundtable, whatever that roundtable may be called in the future, since they're currently revamping their structure and it might not be the seed sector roundtable anymore. And so we are currently having small meetings of the working group to develop an education piece which should provide a base to understand the system. So basically what Mike was saying earlier in a very condensed form, a paper is being drafted by Synthesis Network to explain the Canadian seed system to all participants of the working group. And then we want to create and implement a work plan. We were hoping to talk about this work plan today, but the meeting that was scheduled on April 1st didn't take place, as was explained earlier. So we don't have any information on the work plan right now. And then from that work plan, we will develop recommendations. The governance of that working group comprised of 6 seed industry associations, so basically the seed synergy partners. We have three producer groups, 2 commodity associations, and 2 public breeders, and 3 other entities that represent non-government stakeholders. The working group is, once active, will meet on a monthly basis as needed, and particular task teams can be created for specific topics to dive deeper into more detailed discussions. And we've been already active in reaching out to members and potential volunteers in anticipation of these task teams, so we can line up some experts right away once the need arises. Okay, in terms of composition of the Seed Regulatory Modernization Working Group, the seed industry is represented by the seed synergy partners, the CSTA, the CSGA, CSI, the seed analysts, and the Plant Technology Agency. In addition to that, we have the ASCIS group on board, represented by Gordon Butcher. For producer groups, we have confirmed that Scott Ross of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture will be a member, and Aaron Gowlick of the Grain Growers of Canada. In terms of commodity and value chain associations, Horticultural Council will be represented. As for public breeding institutions, the Crop Development Center of the University of Saskatchewan and an Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada breeder will be present. The 3 other associations acting as non-governmental broader stakeholders will be USC Canada, the Canadian Organic Trade Association, and the Potato Council. Obviously, part 2 of the seed regulations dealing with seed potatoes is also a member.
Hi, everyone. We're now going to do a little Q&A portion. I have on the line several of the working group members. We have Mike Scheffel of the Canadian Seed Growers Association. We have Lauren Hadley of the Canadian Plant Technology Agency, Gordon Butcher of Authorized Seed Crop Inspection Services, Claudio Filner of the Canadian Seed Trade Association, Roy Van Wyk of the Canadian Seed Institute, and Glenn Chansey of the Canadian Seed Growers Association. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Again, if you have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we will definitely get to your questions. So we'll get things underway. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Our first question is, how will I be able to contact and provide my feedback to the working group? Glenn, seeing as you're a co-chair of the working group, would you be able to comment on that for us?
All I can tell you at this point is that the CFIA is putting together an engagement strategy to support the working group, and they haven't elaborated on the details, but their minding is they hope to have an ongoing sort of iterative feedback loop with interested participants. So I think the details are to come, but there's definitely a strong desire to make the process as transparent and accessible as possible.
Next question is, how may timelines be affected by the pandemic? Is fall of 2021 still the planned goal for regulatory modernization for the CFIA to come forward with its proposals?
Well, I can tell you that as well as you know, it's already been conveyed that they have quote unquote paused the process. And I think it only stands to reason that the longer the pause, the more difficult it will be to meet the deadlines. Normally this time of year, the CFA, all departments have to update what they call their forward regulatory plan, where they lay out the timelines. And so, if the pandemic hadn't hit, I think we would know now what the answer to that question is. But if I had to speculate, I would say that there would be some adjustment in the timelines. Exactly how significant, I couldn't say at this point.
Mike, this might be a great one for you to help tackle. How can incorporation by reference serve to improve the seed regulatory system? Can you shed a little bit of light on that for us?
Sure. Incorporation by reference, as I mentioned before, is a tool that can be used. And what happens there is that documents and standards, procedures, or whatever can be in documents outside of regulations, but referenced by the regulations. So the documents could be in the hands of the program folks at CFIA, or like the lab in the case of the methods and procedures for seed testing. They could be a document such as the CSGA Circular 6. And by not having to go through the formal federal regulatory process, which includes a lot of steps and a lot of oversight and a lot of engagement by different levels of government, including Treasury Board and others, you can streamline the process. And if a standard is in the hands of an industry organization, for example, and that industry organization decides that this is something that's important for them and their members, then they can allocate the resources that are required in order to complete a similar process, still a very rigorous process of review and proposals and consultation. But it's up to that organization to marshal the resources, and it's not that you have to rely on another organ of government to see the priority that you might assign to that particular endeavor.
Mike, I think it's Roy Van Wyk here with the Canadian Seed Institute. I think I would add, I'm pretty excited about this particular tool for the industry because, for years there's been concerns about regulatory responsiveness, and I think this tool in particular is one that could really speed up, streamline the process for regulatory change, I think, as Mike kind of indicated.
Thanks, guys. This is an interesting one. Does seed regulatory modernization hinge on the single national seed organization being created? I think I'll start off with Glenn. Can you start off by maybe shedding a little bit of light on that one?
Well, I'm somewhat biased, I guess, but I would say in theory, no, but in practice, it would make a big difference. And I say that only because if the government knows there is let's say a strong consensus in the industry, and they have the mechanism in place to support a movement towards, let's say, rebalancing government and industry responsibilities, they're more likely to be confident in changes that of that nature. If on the other hand we don't have our act together, so to speak, then they may hedge. So, not in the short answer is no, but I think the longer answer is it would be preferable. But maybe others don't see it the same way. I'd be interested in other views.
Yeah. Anybody else have any input?
Claudio with the CSGA.
Hi, Claudio.
I also think it doesn't hinge on a new seed association being established. I think we still operate under the assumption that whatever happens with the vote, that this effort will go ahead. So we, even though it is on pause until further notice, I still operate in my mind under the fall 2021 deadline until it is changed. And regardless of the outcome of the vote, I think we all need to be prepared and get our act together and get our feedback in and work with the government to modernize the seed regs. It would be easier, though, if there's a positive vote and we have a new seed association in the future that could take over some of the responsibilities in a more coordinated fashion, is my opinion.
Another question I've noticed, CropLife Canada is also a Seed Synergy partner, but I noticed it is not part of the working group or it's not on the list of working group members. Why is that? Claudia, would you be able to start us off on that one?
Sure. So we've been working with CropLife, the Seed Synergy partners, on the modernization of Part 5 of the seed regs, which is running on a parallel stream right now. So we've been working under the Seeds and Grains Roundtable with AFC, the CFIA, Health Canada, to look at that part of the seed regs in particular. But coming back to this more broad effort on the whole seed regs, they are definitely involved indirectly with providing their own members with updates, and they can also chip in and distribute their ideas through the other Seed Synergy partners without having a direct spot at the table. Is how it works right now, but mostly focused on the PNT system with CropLife right now.
Can I add that, Mark?
Sure thing, Glenn, go ahead.
I don't think there would be anything preventing us from including them at any point going forward, either in task teams or perhaps even on the working group if it was deemed necessary. I think there's an openness in the mindset, I think, of CFIA and ASC, who essentially are underwriting the process to including whoever needs to be included to make sure we get the right outcome. So, I think, as Claudia said, there's a well-defined allocation of effort amongst the Seed Synergy partners. I think that's been one of the benefits of the Seed Synergy process, where you sort of establish a trust and a common position on a point, and you reduce duplication and effort by having different parties work on different projects. So as Claudia said, this is the current allocation of effort, but there's no reason if it proved necessary or desirable that couldn't be adjusted.
Will all regulatory changes made as a result of this process be science-based? Does anybody have any thoughts there?
Claudia here. Well, as a staff member with a scientific background and believing in science and having that as one of our key objectives in the CSGA, having a science-based regulatory system, the answer would be, well, definitely hope so, but can we make these promises right now? Not really, but it's definitely the goal.
Thanks so much, Claudia. How was it determined who would be member of the working group, and how can other organizations provide input/feedback? Wondering if Glenn, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the working group, and I guess technically is still the case, is a product of the Seed Sector Value Chain Roundtable. So the Roundtable is the mothership, so to speak, and they approved or they supported the creation of the working group, and so ultimately they signed off on the composition, the terms of reference, and the composition. But what I can say about how we arrived at the current configuration, it began with I think a clear message from CFIA and ASC that they wanted the working group to be representative of the whole value chain that was impacted by seed, and so there was a strong emphasis that they brought to the discussion on that point. Of course, we ensured that all the key seed organizations had a seat at the table, and there was no real concern there, notwithstanding the point about CropLife earlier. And then there was a discussion about, well, what was who were the best representatives of that value chain. And I think everybody realized that there was no perfect formula, but what they came up with was obviously, focus on primary producers, and then their customers, and also a desire to see a representative of quote unquote civil society. So they had there's an NGO or representative of an NGO perspective that's also included on the group. So I think, as I said earlier, we'll see when it gets going whether or not it's a representative enough. But I've not sensed that there's any desire on anyone's part to restrict access to the process. If we find out there are parties that aren't effectively represented.
And it's Claudio again. Just want to highlight one more time that there'll also be task teams underneath that working group, most likely. So people who want to participate in that capacity as experts will still have an opportunity to, even though not to be on the bigger working group, but to be on task teams and provide inputs through that avenue. And any member can always contact any CSGA staff, and I imagine any CSGA staff as well, with comments and feedback and suggestions.
Thanks, guys. Is there a prototype of the single window already designed? Is this single window system already being used at all in the industry, or is there an initial plan for it? Can someone shed some light on that one?
Hi, Mark. It's Roy here with the Canadian Seed Institute.
Hey, Roy.
I would say that the seed synergy partners, seed associations, more so than a prototype, have a vision for a single window. So it's not I would say it's not technically designed, but they've looked at so many different things that it's really gets back to the discussions we're having around the benefits of the organizations amalgamating to bring all those services together and all the staff with all that knowledge base, so there's a single point of contact for the users of the seed system in Canada, instead of having to contact one of 5 different organizations, or one of 6, I guess, organizations if they need some information. So the single window idea definitely I see more of a vision at this stage, and we strongly feel that technology is a big part of that single window, and the efficient delivery of services. I know CSGA, for instance, they've done so much work on the crop certification side of things to be able, that entire service to be delivered electronically, and I think they're moving to electronic crop certificates, possibly even as early as this year. And CSI as well. We've been working with our auditors remotely, doing other certification services electronically. That it's I can only see the future where we're using technology a lot more to streamline the services and the sharing of information.
Thanks so much, Roy. What role are seed analysts playing in this? I'm not sure if we actually have any seed analyst members on the line, but I'm just wondering, Claudio, if you might be able to give us some insight there.
Yeah, so the seed analysts are obviously critical for a whole bunch of services for certification and testing. And they're directly affected by certain parts of the seed regulations when it comes to how to be tested, how to be a registered establishment. And so they have a seat, obviously, on the working group represented by Krista. And so they'll have an important role going in, talking about all these subjects. And we see how important they are even right now in the COVID crisis, when capacities might get lower in government labs and other situations. So definitely a big role to play, and I'm sure Krista and her members will get a lot out of it as well.
Yeah, it's Krista Erickson here with the Commercial Seed Analysts Association of Canada.
Hi, Krista. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Yeah, just to expand a bit on what Claudio said, we are a part of the main working group. CSAC will consult with our members during the seed regulatory modernization process, and we'll try and seek feedback from our members on what's important in terms of regulatory modernization. And then as the process moves forward, as others have said, there'll be task force under the main working group. So I'm sure that our analysts will play an important role in those groups as well.
Thank you so much, Krista, and welcome. I didn't realize you were on the line, so I definitely would have called on you for that one. So thank you for that answer.
No worries. Thank you.
I don't know if Lauren Hadley is still on the line, but a question regarding intellectual property protection. Could it be strengthened as a result of regulatory modernization? Might anybody have any preliminary insights there? It might be hard to tell at this point, so we can definitely get back.
Mark, it's Mike here, and
Hey, Mike.
there's definitely some possibilities there. I would suppose. I mean, really, intellectual property protection of plant varieties is subject to the Plant Breeders Act, and the Plant Breeders Act and regulations are really not part of the seed regulatory modernization of this period. The act was recently amended back in 2015, so it's quite current and up to date with the UPROP 91. And here, it sort of depends on the measures that might be taken with regard to common seed. I would expect more than anything else. So common seed, seed that has not been certified, that is sold in Canada has to meet some certain standards and requirements, but generally not allowed to be sold by variety name. Because it's not allowed to be sold by variety name, it sort of provides a bit of cover, if you like, for people who might be selling common seed of protected varieties when they really shouldn't be. And it makes it more difficult for people to be able to enforce their private plant breeders' rights as well, because it is sort of underground and brown bag, as they say. So depending on what sort of measures might be taken in terms of how common seed might have to be, would be regulated in the future, it could bring that seed more out into the open, you could say. Hard to know just now.
Thanks so much, Mike. How are farmers involved in this process, or how might be farmers involved in the process? I'm not sure if we have Scott on the line here today. Is there anybody who might be able to offer us a little bit of insight on how farmers might be able to play a role in this?
It's just Glenn here.
Hi, Glenn.
Scott's not on the line. Are people aware that both the Grain Growers of Canada and the Canadian Federation of Agriculture have seats at the table?
Yes, as Claudio mentioned during our presentation.
Canadian Horticultural Council. I think that's the starting point, really.
Yes, there are several.
There's also.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's also, I mentioned earlier when the question regarding communication engagement. CFIA has indicated in preliminary discussions around the engagement process that they will be reaching out sort of iteratively through the process, and I believe farmers are a big part of the audience that they're looking at, as well as the seed industry.
How might seed crop inspection services be affected or modernized as a result of this process? Gordon Butcher on line today. Gordon, would you be able to give us a little insight there?
Well, I think one of the big modernizations that should be considered and is certainly taking over the training of the LFCIs, the inspectors, because it's always been a challenge for CFIA to supply that, and it's quite, I don't want to necessarily say archaic, but it could be much more efficient if it was supplied virtually and sort of an online version. So that would be one area that could certainly be modernized to a large degree, in our opinion, as far as the ASCIS Association is concerned. And it's been brought to the fore again this year because of the COVID-19 issue, and as a result, we have no training for about 35 new inspectors. So it's putting considerable pressure on the ASCIS Association to cover off for this year. So that's one area. I guess that would be the first one that I can think of.
Great. Thank you, Gordon. We have a few minutes left, so we're going to take some additional questions. I'm not going to put these ones up on the screen. I'm just going to read these ones out. An additional question here is, how many resources will CFIA get to conduct regulatory enforcement? I'm wondering if anybody can give us some insights there on whether this process will result in CFIA specifically getting any more resources.
Hi, Mark. It's Claudio. I think that's very hard for us to answer right now. I don't know if anybody from CFIA is in the chat, but yeah, this is quite hard for us to answer, I think.
Yeah, that's more of we'll just say stay tuned for that. As we mentioned during the presentation, this is the first in a series of webinars on regulatory modernization. And so I'm sure we'll definitely be able to address that down the road in some form. Let's see, we have one here regarding the Canada Novel Traits Regulation. Mike, I think I'll direct this one to you. Will the Seed Modernization Working Group also address the Canada Novel Traits Regulation?
Mark, yeah. So as Claudio just mentioned a little while ago when talking about CropLife and its involvement in the seed regulatory modernization, he mentioned that CSGA and CropLife and the Canada Grains Council had been working quite closely together with officials at CFIA and Health Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, I believe, on the current policy environment with regards to plants with novel traits. Whether it actually requires amendments to Part 5 of the seeds regulations, or whether it's more an issue that can be resolved through just policy development amongst those organizations with industry input, still remains to be seen. So certainly plants with novel traits are part of this whole seed reg modernization, but whether or not actual amendments to the seeds regulations, Part 5, will be required in order to achieve, I think, some objectives that are mutually agreed upon already, that remains to be seen.
Make it more efficient through policy changes, but the option, I think, is definitely not off the table, that there might be regulatory change in the future in Part 5. But as mentioned, we're hoping to get it with policy direction instead of regulatory changes. But it remains to be seen.
Thanks, guys. This is an interesting one. Has COVID-19 exposed some weaknesses or areas of concern around seed supply, which will now be able to be addressed during the modernization process? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's Claudia. I'll give it a stab. And I think in a recent podcast, the two of us did, Mark, we had a similar question. I think COVID definitely exposes the weaknesses and strengths of the system. And we hear from members that there are definitely regulatory service delays from governmental agencies. So I think it would be it's a time to see which services are really, really essential and need to be done, and which services, which customs we are doing or have been doing that are now on pause during COVID, and it might turn out that they don't need to be done anymore in the future. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's a testing ground for the system, and we might learn a lot during that time of crisis for seed reg modernization.
Yeah, once we see how this whole pandemic plays out. So thank you very much, Claudio. What, if anything, this is another one that might be for you too, Claudio. What, if anything, can seed producers based in the United States proactively be doing in anticipation of these potential regulatory changes?
I guess I'll coordinate with the American Seed Trade Association. We have a strong connection, CSGA and ASTA, on the staff level and overlapping membership, even I think board of directors. So I think we coordinate with ASTA and keep them up to date. And they're certainly open for feedback and suggestion from U.S. colleagues and U.S.-based companies who need to do business in Canada.
I could add to that, like Mark.
Sure, Glenn.
So from the point of view of certified seed, I think as most people know, we have essentially common standard setting body in IOSCA that we have a seat at their board table. We're active in all their standard setting bodies or sub bodies, and they're enabled by the Federal Seeds Act, and we're essentially enabled by the Canadian Seed Act. And there's been a long-standing commitment on both sides, both at the industry and government level, to ensure that there are no barriers created by changes that may take place at the regulatory level. The Federal Seeds Act is going through their own process of review and at the moment, and so far there's nothing there that's been identified as alarming for us. And similarly, we have a understanding, and we have processes in place that ensure that through AOSCA and by extension the 40-odd state seed certification agencies, that if anything's been contemplated, changes that have been contemplated are shared with them, and potential problems identified before they actually become problems by changes. So I think, as Claudio pointed out, the ASTA CSGA connection is strong. And that's certainly important from the perspective of coordinated lobbying. And I think that the AOSCA CSGA relationship and CSI and CFIA, for that matter, are both part of that Canadian, I guess, component of AOSCA. Ensure that when there are changes, there are no disruptions that result. So I think we're in a good place in terms of avoiding any problems, and there may even be opportunity for learning from each other as well.
Thanks so much, Glenn. We have time for one final question regarding royalty collection. Is our seed royalty collection, is that involved in any step of this modernization process?
I would say no, not really. Again, it's royalty collection. It's either plant breeders' rights matter under that act and those regulations, or it's a private contractual arrangement outside of the seed regulations themselves. So my initial response would be, I don't think so.
So just to add to that as well, Mark, if you take a look, just take a quick look, Google CFIA Forward Regulatory Plan, and in that you will see separate initiatives. So there's a separate initiative focused on PBR modernization, and a separate initiative devoted to the seed regulatory modernization, two separate acts two separate institutional delivery mechanisms, two separate policy discussions that are not entirely unrelated, as Mike pointed out earlier, in the sense that there are things that we can do through seed modernization that can strengthen the ability to enforce intellectual property. But the question that was raised is very much the subject of a parallel but separate exercise.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me on the line here today. I appreciate your help, and you all have a great day. And
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
And thank you to our audience for spending your lunch hour with us today. We really appreciate it. Again, this presentation will be made available on our website, germination.ca, within the next 48 hours. And remember, this is just the first in a series of planned webinars on seed regulatory modernization. So if you had a question that we didn't get to today or something that you're wondering about, stay tuned, because there will be more webinars coming as the seed regulatory modernization process plays itself out. Again, I am Mark Zinkowitz, editor of Germination, and I was very happy to be your host today. So everybody stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.